totally wrong in the States around policing. And it also happened in Britain because as chair of the Stonehenge Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I was appalled when I heard witness testimonies about what happened at the Battle of the Beanfield, when the police of Britain, who'd taken off their numbers, they were all anonymous, they had dark visors, they seemed to have been padded out with military types, they let rip against all the hippies who were just going to Stonehenge to worship the summer solstice and have fun. And they brutalised them, they smashed their vehicles, they handcuffed them behind their backs with plastic wire that, really traumatised these people. And they stuck 800 in prison overnight, including some of my friends. I wasn't there because I was off doing my degree at the University of London, but I was there in spirit as a, seeker of wisdom. And that's all they were. They were having a peace festival. And that's what the police did to them in the UK in the 1980s, right? Well, that's all totally wrong. That's completely what the Minneapolis police are doing. So I stand with the people on this. I'm totally opposed to this ridiculous, it's only fascist states and really right-wing authoritarian states that think that behaviour is okay. That's Gestapo type stuff. No, it's not okay. Totally wrong. And we, the people, are calling them to account. And, non-violently, I'm not advocating that people should do anything to disrupt the community. That levels the argument down to their level. We have to stay non-violent and wisdom workers, like Gandhian tactics, using solely non-violence to confront the illegal use of force and power with justice, truth and love. That's the only way. And I'm confident that American people will come through this without violent revolution, but with a moral revolution. That everything Trump stands for and all his hatred and all his racism, that will go as we wake up when the dawn comes of enlightenment and wisdom. And, the control by the media, the control by the elites that run these, the alphabetic soup of agencies that spy on everything we do nowadays, they need a download of the Holy Spirit too, to realise that what they're doing is wrong. It was that same coterie, the Cambridge Analytica elites, the Steve Bannon elites, that created this whole nightmare situation we're facing by deliberately stoking up white racism. And I've been reading Chris Wylie's book on this. It is there in black and white. This is factual. As a political scientist, this is how it's been done. Well, we mustn't play into their hands. Those types want civil war in America. And they've been, thinking this up for a long time. Well, sorry, we're not going to have that. We're going to have civil peace. We're going to have non-violence, the traditions of Martin Luther King and Thomas Merton and all the other proper saints of American history and culture. Going right back to Abe Lincoln and his largesse of spirit to see that, the peoples and races of America have to live and work in peace. Now that would be the Holy Spirit, bringing the good news. Okay, I want to move on and just say, talking about good news, we are coming up to the Midsummer Solstice, which is a very sacred time for Druids, as you know, and other pagan, primal people around the planet and other religions. And so, of course, we're going to celebrate this. Now, normally, there's a big festival takes place at Stonehenge, a gathering overnight, and I've been there many times. When I was living in that region, I set up this Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Stonehenge with my colleague George Fursoff, who had been in the Battle of the Beanfield. He had been arrested and handcuffed and stuck in jail. And he told me the story. He got me to set this Truth and Reconciliation Commission up. And we've had about 30 meetings since then. And still there's been no real official in-writing apology from the police. There's been unofficial verbal apologies by the police. But they've never released the files. We don't know who took the operational decisions to brutalise the young people of Britain in that way. Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister at the time, and she was pretty fascistic in her tendencies. She had close friendship with Pinochet, who was clamping down in Chile on left-wing trade unionists, people that wanted to fly the flag for Allende, and poetry, the poetry of peace that Allende and his attempt to build democratic socialism in Chile, which was thwarted by Kissinger and Nixon, and Pinochet was the result, who was a fascist dictator who for the good of the people arrested people like me, intellectuals with a slight leftist tendency. Well, they were found dropped from helicopters or dropped from planes, or they were beheaded and tortured. Those were nasty times. And unbelievably, Margaret Thatcher was in bed with these guys. So there are files still to be released about who was in charge of police policy at the Battle of the Beanfield. And, did Margaret Thatcher and Pinochet have a phone call after and said, yeah, we smashed those hippies, bloody lefties, we got them. Yeah, probably. It's shocking, in my opinion. And truth will out, my friends. So anyway, fast forward to now, we got the Stones reopened after they were all shut down, after the Battle of Beanfield. They were shut down for nearly, over 10 years, 15 years, from 1985 till 2099, when, after I set up this Truth and Reconciliation Commission with George, we had all the bigwigs, the police, English Heritage, National Trust, various hippies, alternative community, Druid elders, and we all sat around the table, and then they were opened again. And that was the days of Tony Blair's government in its heyday, when it was still a kind of democratic socialist project, before the 9/11 catastrophe which destroyed it as a force for good in British politics, in my opinion. So during that wonderful time, 2000, we had some great events at the Stones, and everybody celebrated. King Arthur organised the various groups to come, and drummers, and we all did our rituals and peace work. So that's great, and it's been going on ever since. I go when I'm in Britain. I'm not there, so I haven't been going for the last few years. Fast forward to now, it's all on lockdown. We can't go. Nobody can go to the Stones this year. So there's, the Stonehenge gathering's been cancelled, according to English Heritage. Well, me and a bunch of friends of mine have said, no, that's not good enough. We're going to have an online Stonehenge Peace Festival for Midsummer this year. And here you are, I'm announcing it. We've got an interesting lineup of musicians that want to play both acoustic and non-acoustic. And because we're actually going to be doing this on Zoom, in a strange way, there's even more freedom than if we were actually at the Stones, because there's such tight policing of those summer solstice gatherings that it's got a bit of a joke. You can't even light candles, you can't, take a bottle of mead in because blah, blah. It's like very anti-joyous. Police are everywhere. So we're able to have this party. It's going to be an online summer solstice party, organised through Zoom. It'll also be live streamed to YouTube. So you'll be able to watch this. And we hope, maybe hundreds or whatever, I don't know, we'll see thousands possibly, might be interested. I mean, the Stonehenge Midsummer Peace gatherings can attract up to 30,000 people. So let's see how many are still around and want to be part of this. And I will be doing my own thing. We're going to have some talks as well. It's not just, rock and roll. It's also intellectual work. So it's going to be like the Green Gathering back in the day, the big Green Gathering, where I used to give lectures and talks. We've got Chris Busby going to give some talks. And I've got other intellectuals from all over the world. I've put this out to the Wisdom Council of the Planet, which is being convened by an amazing friend of mine called Satyen Raja, who's based in BC near Vancouver. And he's got together over 20 amazing shamans, intellectuals, and seers and sages from all over the planet. And they're all going to get a little, a speaking slot to do a ritual. We've got Peruvian shamans, whatever. They can do a prayer. I think they'll be at Machu Picchu even. So we might be able to have a kind of live aid for spirit, which would be fun for all the people around the planet that love the midsummer solstice. It's our festival, guys, and let's do it. Be there. Come and join us. If you just search us on. We're going to be setting up platforms on YouTube and on Zoom. So just email me if you want details. And if you are a competent musician and you want to perform, if you are able to perform properly and want to get involved as a performer, we have a 24-hour slot to play with. We're going to do this from sunset on the 20th to sunset on the 21st. So we're happy to have on board people that can actually properly contribute to the bardic dimension of this event. Likewise, if you're an intellectual and you have something to say, you want to get your view across, and you have some truth to share, or you're a whistleblower and you know something we need to know about. If the theme is somehow peace related, because this is the Stonehenge Midsummer Peace Festival 2020, then please contact me. I'm the academic director for this. We have a music director. Hawkwind, the old group that used to play at the original summer solstice events at Stonehenge, they're helping with the music side of it all. I can put you in touch with them. And Michelle Little, my friend and colleague, is helping to bring the whole thing together. So I think it's very exciting. We're going to have a great night, folks, and I'm going to be up 24 hours probably helping to run this thing. So let's make it a good one. And we can't get the Stones in person, so hey, we're going to do it, virtually, because we're all on planetary lockdown. The reason they cancelled the Stonehenge event is because of the virus, right? So let's turn that into a triumph. Now I want to move on and talk about my little book of peace declarations, which I've been working away on like a very good boy. I want a pat on the back. I've been beavering away at this, for the last month of lockdown, finding these precious and incredible declarations from the peace movement, international diplomacy, the UN, but going right back in time. I've gone back to the Ten Commandments. I've gone back to the first ever peace treaty in history between the Hittite Empire and the Egyptian Empire, for God's sake, 1290 BC. And we know it was factual because we found copies in Egypt and in the Hittite realms. And it's now in the UN headquarters. There's a facsimile of it. First ever peace treaty in history, which is declared as witnessed by all the gods and goddesses. What's so important about that declaration is the dimension of spirituality. Our ancestors knew that peace is so sacred, all the gods want to watch. Well, I think it's still true. And so I put all these declarations together. It's a great resource for peace scholars, people interested in saving the planet, really. It's like a how to save the planet handbook. And I want to just highlight a few of them. There isn't time to run through them all. I'm on to the fourth volume, can you believe? This is the fourth volume I'm working on. And I want to give you a little bit of some goodies that are in this fourth volume. One of them, which I think is really interesting, is a text from an organisation which most people have never heard of, but I had, because I studied modern history, obviously, at London. And this is a thing called the Union of Democratic Control, or UDC. And this body, which was in its day quite influential and quite significant, was founded by a guy called E.D. Morel. And he was a genius, he was a visionary, really. And I discovered through doing the research for it, he was actually born in Paris, for God's sake. I didn't realise this. His dad was a Frenchman in Paris, and his mother a Quaker Englishwoman, and he was brought up partly in France, partly in England. And he was a very intellectual chap. He totally rejected war. He was a pacifist in the classical French sense of the term. He thought it was just stupid war because it kills people and destroys cultures and civilizations. There has to be a way of resolving differences between nations and peoples. So he was really bitterly opposed to World War One. He thought this was a catastrophe. And along with a small group of British intellectuals, because he'd become anglicised by then, he'd married an English woman, he'd settled in England, and he was working in London as an editor and things. And he saw the drumbeats of war, World War One approaching, and he was horrified because he knew the catastrophe it would cause, partly French, but he didn't hate Germans, he didn't hate Austrians, he didn't hate Hungarians or anyone. Why couldn't we just live in peace, was his view, and that's totally mine as well. So he tried to stop the war, he got petitions going, he got everyone to sign stuff, and of course the elites in the government offices just carried on ignoring the people. So in 1915, after the war tragically started, he formed this thing called the Union of Democratic Control. Now the point was to give control of foreign policy to the people. In a democracy, we the people should be able to say, well, we don't actually want war with Germany or Russia or whatever. No, I don't actually want to have a nuclear war against Russia. Thank you very much. I'm the people. It doesn't suit me, to have humanity wiped out. So at the moment, and it was true then, it's also true now, normal people have no control over foreign policy. We don't even know about it unless you're a specialist like me and have actually bothered to study it. Most people haven't got a clue. Well, E.D. Morel, bless him, set out to change all that, and he founded this Union of Democratic Control, which included many of the great intellectuals and thinkers of the day, and they did their best to influence things, and they set out a declaration, which I've given in the book, and he worked tirelessly for peace. He's after the war came to an end, he was utterly opposed to the Versailles Peace Treaty because he said this is going to be just vengeance against the Germans. This will only unleash more trouble. We need something that doesn't, cause that degree of pain. I mean, it was everybody's fault, not just Germany's. It was Britain's because of our imperialist jingoism and so on, and it was French because of their sort of patriotism, vive la France. Everyone was partly to blame. So don't just, grumble and blame it on the people that happened to lose, the Germans. Anyway, he was, during the war, he was quite outspoken in his anti-war views, as I would have been if I was alive then. And the Union of Democratic Control had about 650,000 members by 1917. That's a lot of people, nearly, 1 million people. I'm sure with sympathisers it would have been 1 million. By 1917, saying peace now on just and fair terms. Bertrand Russell, who was of the same opinion, loved this guy and corresponded with him. Bertrand was then at Cambridge, a young don, took a very similar stand, pacifist as well. And the great French intellectual, Romain, Rolland, who's one of my heroes, great European philosopher of peace, I'm going to come on to him a bit later in more depth, he also said of E.D. Morel, he's like the conscience of Britain. Well, guess what happened? The Daily Express wrote against Morel as a secret agent of Germany, which was totally untrue, publishing rude attacks on him. Even they listed details of the Union of Democratic Control meetings and urged its readers to go and break them up using violence. I mean, what? Daily Express, kind of fascist, violent encouragement against the peace people. And then, on the 22nd of August 1917, and he'd been subject to physical assaults, this guy, Morel, the police came and searched his home, and they found a pamphlet that he'd sent to Romain Rolland in Switzerland, a neutral country. And apparently this act alone was a breach of the Defence of the Realm Act. You weren't allowed to send a pamphlet to a neutral country. I mean, what kind of madness is that? This is why I so oppose war, because it's a madness that sweeps over people. It turns them into crazies. And that's why, as a druid for peace, I've always said, no, these warrior types have to be, we need some sort of sanity spray that we can squirt on them. If they're spraying pepper on us, we need some reason spray. So, and as a result of this, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison, in Pentonville Prison, up the road from my old house in Islington. I mean, for sending a pamphlet to Switzerland, right, to a great pacifist leader, Romain, Rolland. I mean, it's shocking. Bertrand Russell met him after his release. Poor old Morel, who was a dignified gentleman, this is what Russell says of him. His hair is completely white, where there was hardly a tinge of white before. When he first came out, he collapsed completely, physically and mentally, largely as the result of insufficient food in the prison. He says one only got 3/4 of an hour reading in a whole day. The rest of the time is spent on prison work. End of quotes. Now that's Bertrand Russell meeting and hearing from Morel in person. And this poor guy, Morel, never recovered. It broke his health, those 6 months in prison. He was a sensitive guy, an intellectual, and, he died in 1924, I think it was. Now, old Russell, I think, he was shocked by this. And he himself did something extremely brave. When I was studying philosophy, Russell is an important figure, and when I was a little boy, very small boy, he was famous for being a CND activist. And we used to go on peace marches from Brighton up to London. And my mother once pointed and said, look, there's Bertrand Russell. It was a very famous march in Trafalgar Square when he was arrested again and stuck in prison at the age of 90 or something. I mean, he was a great man. I never met him, but I knew people that had known him. Now this is his story, Russell's view, and this is all in the book, by the way. Okay, so Russell was at Trinity College. He'd just written Principia Mathematica with Whitehead, who was a great intellectual himself. He was made a Fellow of the Royal Society. He had a lectureship for 5 years. Everything was cool. But then the war was looming, and Russell had a conscience. He believed, like me, that intellectuals have a duty, not just to kind of study their little bit of specialism, philosophy of maths and logic or whatever, but actually we have a duty to speak out about world issues like nuclear war or global warming or, conflicts in the Middle East or whatever. We have a duty. And so what he did was he got a petition together, signed by over 60 Cambridge dons, he was teaching at Cambridge, where they said, quote, their conviction of the supreme importance of preserving England's neutrality, considering no vital interest of this country is endangered, such as would justify our participation in a war. Well, bless them, 60 Cambridge dons, they're not stupid Cambridge academics, they said, let's be neutral. If Europe wants to have a war, the French and the German, they keep fighting each other all the time. They'd done it in 1870, they'd done it endlessly. Well, let them get on with it. It's not in Britain's interest to take sides. We should, if anything, try and mediate. That would have been my position, as it was the 60 Cambridge dons. Russell went even further. In August, he got a letter printed, and he sent it, to the Guardian, actually, and the Daily News, and it was published on the 3rd of August, 1914. And it was a very important letter, and I published it, therefore. People don't know this, apart from specialists. This is amazing what he wrote. Russell wrote the following: Sir, against the vast majority of my countrymen, in the name of humanity and of civilization, I protest against our share in the planned-for destruction of Germany. A month ago, Europe was a peaceful comity of nations. If an Englishman killed a German, he was hanged. Now, he is a patriot. We rejoice when we read of innocent young men blindly obedient to the word of command, mown down in thousands by the machine guns of Liège. Those who saw the London crowds during the nights leading up to the declaration of war saw a whole population, hitherto peaceable and humane, letting loose in a moment instincts of hatred and bloodlust. Dim abstractions of unimaginable wickedness conceal the fact that the enemy are men like ourselves, neither better nor worse, men who love their homes and the sunshine and all the simple pleasures of common lives. And all this madness, this rage, all this flaming death of our civilization and its hopes, has been brought about because a set of official gentlemen living luxurious lives have chosen that it should occur, rather than any of them should suffer some infinitesimal rebuff to his country's pride. The diplomatists, restrained by punctilio from making or accepting the small concessions that might have saved the world, hurried on in blind fear to loose the armies for the work of mutual butchery. And behind them stand vast forces of national greed and hatred, fostered by the upper class as a distraction from social discontent, artificially nourished by the sinister influence of the makers of armaments, encouraged by a whole foul literature of glory, and by every textbook of history by which the minds of children are polluted. Our diplomacy has not been guiltless. Sir Edward Grey refused, down to the last moment, to inform Germany of the conditions of our neutrality or our intervention. I'm going to publish this text in full. This is an important peace declaration by one of the most important philosophers in modern British history. And it's a damning and totally spot-on critique of the war machine in the First World War, but it was the same ever since. It's the same idiots. He calls them, gentlemen of leisure, the upper classes plotting the disaster for the poor. And that's been going on. That's the story of the Iraq War, the Libyan crisis, the Syrian crisis, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, you name it, and World War II. Anyway, Russell was sent to prison as well as Morel, and he also served 6 months for, inciting pacifism. Only he got to have an easier time because he was given, unlimited reading and writing potential. So for him, it didn't make any difference. It was just like he moved his library. So anyway, that's one thing I just want to flag up. It's really, really interesting. I'm enjoying doing the research because I'm finding out new stuff, which I'm then able to share by publishing it. The next thing I want to share, and this I find also absolutely fascinating, from the Book of Peace Declarations, is the Declaration of the Socialist International, which is very peace-oriented, because at the time Morel and Russell were writing, socialism was a new kind of thing that was in the air. And gradually, Labour parties, socialist parties, social democratic parties were coming into more and more prominence. And actually, E.D. Morel eventually stood as a Labour MP immediately after the war. And he defeated Winston Churchill in Dundee. He didn't like Churchill at all. He said Churchill was a warmonger. I think he was right. And he won the election, became a Labour MP, and everybody thought he might become the first Labour Foreign Secretary. It was Ramsay MacDonald's government. He was the Prime Minister. But in fact, Ramsay MacDonald stayed as both Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, which is a bit naughty. He should have given it to Morel. Instead, he let Morel, he tried to promote Morel for the Nobel Peace Prize. He didn't win it ever. And not long after, he had a heart attack, which is very sad. But Morel had become a socialist and a Labour Party chap, having stepped down from the Liberals, who he found wishy-washy on peace. And a lot of people looked to socialism to bring peace in Europe. And there were varieties and shades of socialism. Obviously, Lenin was a social democrat of sorts, but he took the putschist view that you've got to seize power. You've got to do a proletarian dictatorship and not just seize power, but hold on to it. And that caused all kinds of trouble, let's face it, you know. That was one route. We can call that the extreme left route. Then there was the other, more central democratic route. The trouble is that the German Social Democrats ended up supporting the German war effort. A lot of these socialist groups all kind of supported their nations. Even in France, you know, the socialists on the whole, the left, supported the war effort. It was only Romain Rolland who, as we'll see, had something to say about all that. But the Socialist International is interesting. That was formed. There were socialist groups came into being, and it was formed and then reformed, and eventually it was reformed in 1951. These were the Social Democrats who rejected, you know, rule by putsch, rule by coup, but they were also of the left. They wanted, and peace is very much at the forefront of their work. At the time of the Cold War, they were trying to mediate between the extreme capitalist bloc, American jingoists, you know, let's bomb Vietnam types, Kissinger and Nixon and all those cronies, and the extreme leftists of, you know, pro-Soviet Union, let's all become communists and that's the way to peace. No, they were somewhere in the middle, and the Labour Party, the German Social Democrats, the Scandinavian socialist tradition also, you know, throughout Europe were saying, oi, we want peace in Europe. And they issued some brilliant declarations, which I got in the book. One of them in 2003 is called the Ethical Charter. It was adopted at the 22nd Congress of the Socialist International in Sao Paulo in Brazil, which is an amazing city. It's the largest city in the Americas. It's 13 million people. It's the largest community of Jews in Latin America, the largest community of Japanese. It's got vast multicultural population. And it's the largest Portuguese-speaking city in the world, bigger than Lisbon. And they met there in 2003 and issued an amazing declaration, which I've got, which is basically saying that, you know, we, the socialists of the world, are going to work for peace. And it sets out clearly the rejection. Let me read. We will fight against all forms of discrimination based on gender, race, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, language, religion, philosophical or political beliefs. We will fight against all ultra-nationalist, fundamentalist, xenophobic and racist trends. And we will refrain from all forms of political alliance or cooperation at any level with any political party inciting or trying to inflame prejudices, ethnic or racial hatred. So in other words, in 2003, they're seeing off the rise of Trump and the Bannons and these xenophobes and the Brexit lot. These people have been stirred up in a pot by the extreme right, deliberately, you know, like ghouls from the past, peddling their xenophobic racism. Well, the Socialist International in Brazil, Sao Paulo, one of the most multicultural cities on the planet, said, no, we're not having that. And I 100% agree with them. And they go on to say, we reject and resolutely oppose any drift to authoritarianism, as well as any political system which allows or practices the violation of human rights to conquer or impose its power. Political assassination, torture, arbitrary detention, press censorship, banning or repression of peaceful demonstrations. Gosh, you know, it's as if they'd seen into the future and they were warning what was going to happen, because the Trump lot seemed intent on doing all that. Their drift to authoritarianism, and, you know, you name it. And it's not just Trump, it's the Republican government of change.